Thank you so much. And before I dive in, I just wanted to answer Kira. I also remember where I was when Pillar 2 was adopted. First, it disrupted my summer holiday, but it was more interesting in my autumn holiday when it was said that there was an agreement on Pillar 2. And we looked, and it had been said that it was going to be consensus decision-making. And then we discovered that Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka had not said yes, even though they had been in the inclusive framework. So then we thought, this doesn't look like an agreement, and Ireland sent out a press release before the negotiations even started saying, we agreed to the outcome. What outcome? And at that moment, I was not very happy. But this was in October 2021, and now we actually look back at that moment and say, that was probably where the momentum for a UN tax convention began. The US was out saying it was only some small countries that hadn't agreed. In Africa, Nigeria and Kenya are not small countries. And I also remember where I was when I got the qualified domestic top-up tax. That was probably the worst Christmas present I have ever received. 22nd of December, and it changed the rules in a way where not only were they not efficient, but also it allowed tax havens a road around the rules to keep the revenue. And it's true, as Kira says, we mainly work on developing countries. It's not my job to work on tax in my own country, Denmark, but our concern was that these rules would make it more difficult for countries like Denmark to introduce a real effective minimum corporate rate of a higher percentage than 15%. And since that day, I was feeling like, I hope that Denmark doesn't commit to this. Then Denmark committed to it, and then I wished for a day of, can we renegotiate these rules so that we're not locked into this harmful way of doing minimum taxation? And we've been told no, but turns out that when Donald Trump says that you can renegotiate everything. So now we're opening the package, but for all the wrong reasons. But anyway, first I want to say thank you for the invitation to the EU Tax Observatory and for the amazing work. The Tax Observatory has given us eyes and ears in this debate. We get extremely interesting information. For example, we've seen that after the 2015 package to stop base erosion and profit shifting was adopted, profit shifting went up to an all-time high where it has remained ever since. It's also thanks to the Tax Observatory that we know a lot about the inefficiencies of Pillar 2 and the consequences of the loopholes that are in the rules. We know that some of the main profit-shifting destinations in the world are actually EU member states. And we also know that wealth tax is possible. It's a matter of political will, but we can do it. It's not that hard. And on what lies ahead, it looks like there's two avenues, as far as I can see. The one is indeed to negotiate Pillar 2 with the US administration again. As was actually mentioned, it was during the Trump administration that the whole exercise started. The US administration had a lot of influence, both on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and then they didn't support it anyway. But so now we've been invited to negotiate with Washington again, with the administration. And then there's Congress, and we don't know what they'll decide. And generally, this approach is what we call US first. It's where the rest of the world looks to Washington to see what the global tax rules will look like. That's one avenue. And the other avenue is indeed the UN Tax Convention. And what we have there is, last year there was a mandate adopted. And the mandate says that we'll be negotiating a convention between now and the end of 2027. And I just want to read to you part of the objective. It is to establish an inclusive, fair, transparent, efficient, equitable, and effective international tax system for sustainable development. This is what's on the table. Now we have a mandate that doesn't just include corporate tax. It does include corporate tax, but it also includes taxation of high net worth individuals. It includes tax and environment. It has a very broad focus on the whole tax agenda, and most importantly, it allows all countries to participate on an equal footing. There was one country in February that decided no longer to participate on an equal footing, and that was the United States. So if you like, you can say this avenue is the US last. And the atmosphere in the room when the United States walked out was very relaxed at the United Nations because this is not the first time. In fact, at the same time, the US had just left the climate negotiations for the second time. They never joined the Biodiversity Convention. They announced that they were leaving the Human Rights Council, which was a bit peculiar because they weren't actually a member, but no one had told Washington that. And they also no longer support the Sustainable Development Goals. But the UN has a long history of having global negotiations where the rest of the world finds each other. And then eventually the US has to comply. We've seen this several times also on regulation of multinational corporations. So this US last approach, it's quite normal at the UN, and I would argue we often get more ambitious agreements when the US leaves at the beginning rather than at the end. So which road should the EU take? You know how good friends are not always the ones that tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And if we can say one thing, it's EU, girl, it's time to start meeting new people. It's very nice that he wants to see you again, and he still has the engagement ring. You also know that he's going to want to write the rules again, and he's going to be the first one to break those rules again. There's a party going on at the UN where everybody else is at. Why don't you go there and you meet them and see if there's some things that you can agree on? And no, it's not cheating. He broke up with you in January again. But this is the exciting part, is that now we actually have a truly global dialogue. And one of the things that the UN Tax Convention will discuss is to have a protocol on digital services tax. Can you imagine? The whole world, except the US, are going to be discussing digital services taxes. I'm definitely going to be taking note on that one. But what is the EU actually doing? It seems the EU is trying to go down both roads at the same time. And as much as we're very happy that Donald Trump is talking to us again, we're much more reluctant in the UN negotiations. And the point that EU has raised is, we see it as a bit schizophrenic, because the EU says you cannot make decisions on global tax rules unless it's by consensus. This is the position in the UN. And the other part of the position that the EU has is that everyone should follow the OECD rules. Those rules were not adopted by consensus. When the Common Reporting Standard was adopted, it was less than 50 countries and the EU that signed, but the vast majority of the world's countries were never part of negotiating the standard on automatic information exchange. With the BEPS package in 2015, there was over 100 developing countries that were not part of the negotiations. And even worse, from a diplomatic perspective, the EU has for a number of years been blacklisting countries as uncooperative if they do not follow these global standards that, mind you, these countries were not part of negotiating. And what they're saying is that these rules don't work for us. We want to be able to participate as equals. So when the EU says in the UN that it's completely unacceptable to adopt things unless you have consensus, it causes questions, I think would be the diplomatic word. The truth is there is no consensus. The US is not going to come and join the UN negotiations, but everyone else is. It gives us a unique chance to try and negotiate an agreement, just like we have on climate, on human rights, on sustainable development goals, on all the other things that we are negotiating without the US. And the fact that we have a mandate to say it's an international tax system for sustainable development also means that we're finally linking tax to all the other issues that we have at the UN. And what this can give us is a fairer tax system. It can give us a transparent negotiation. It also means that parliamentarians can actually follow the negotiations before the final agreement is reached. And it gives us a chance to work with everybody else around the world. Because one problem that is seen all over the world is that countries are losing very large sums of money because of corporate tax avoidance. Countries are giving up on taxing the wealthy. This is not a rich country problem or a poor country problem. This is a problem that we have in common. And lastly, it can actually create a clearer international tax system. Right now, we don't have a global tax system. Everyone can go home and do their own global tax rules if they so like. We know that the US likes that, but actually other countries are doing it as well. And all this unilateral action is what creates a lot of uncertainty. The last plea from my side is just a little bit about how we speak in this town when we talk about tax, and same also in Paris. I noted down, we have a global forum at the OECD, which isn't global. Not all countries are there. We have an inclusive framework that is less inclusive than the global forum. We have a minimum effective corporate tax rate of 15%, which allows companies to pay all the way down to 0% in some cases. So the name of that one should be the minimum effective corporate tax rate of 0%. We have public country-by-country reporting here in the EU, which isn't country-by-country. We have automatic information exchange, which is anything but automatic if you are a developing country and you're trying to get information from Switzerland. And lastly, we have a blacklist of uncooperative jurisdictions, which includes Vanuatu and Palau, but does not include the United States. And if there is any example of uncooperative behavior, I would say it's enough now. Let's stop following Washington and let's start talking to the rest of the world about the kind of global tax system that we would like to see. Thank you.
Many, many thanks to all of you. I will unfortunately deliver a much more traditional type of speech here. Or perhaps not, unfortunately. I would like to start by thanking all of you for the invitation, especially Gabrielle, my old counterparts, Gerasimos, a former colleague at the European Commission, and Pasquale, with which we have established a very productive relationship. Now, I speak here on behalf of the European business community, which I should point out is also a part of civil society, the one that actually pays taxes. Now, I promise you a more traditional type of speech, and I will be delivering those. The EU is in the end at the forefront of committing to adopt and implementing global reforms on corporate taxation in the inclusive framework of the G20 OECD, representing around 80% of the global GDP last time I checked. Now, this has been the core and implemented to various initiatives, the BEPS that we mentioned before, that introduced measures to combat both real and perceived tax erosion, and undesirable tax practices, as in its commitment to adopt and implementing the OECD two-pillar solution. Now, the two-pillar solution, as we all know, introduces a floor on tax competition slightly above zero, right? And allocating large multinational corporate profits to countries where their customers are based and where firms do have an actual physical and productive presence, a true milestone in terms of global taxation. I also remember where I was when this was introduced, because that was a family moment. I'm not going to share it here. I am fundamentally a very private person. Now, while the aims of those initiatives were strongly positive, and we as an organization will support them, it is clear that the adoption of those measures has resulted in an overall rather complex, costly, and burdensome tax compliance landscape for European companies, which are the ones in which I'm speaking on behalf here. Now, navigating those overlapping measures and the increased tax and legal uncertainty, all the while we are still being asked to prepare for both the green and the digital transitions. We can do multitasking too, so what can I say? Now, we have major questions of uncertainty in relation to significant partners globally, not only the United States, but other large economies which can be rather uncompliant and uncooperative in many areas. I'm talking about China. Now, the way that they're implementing, among other things, the two-pillar solution introduces both unclarity in relation to the way that those rules are going to be implemented, but also on the overall ability that we have to implement a true, fair global tax framework. Now, we should always remember, we all have stock stories that we tell when we go to environments like this. My former colleague, Benjamin, always tells this story about the rabbit fur from Luxembourg, right? So, I mean, I have heard that, I think, about 5 times. I have one that I always tell people about the quote-unquote need to increase tax take on Europe. I moved to Business Europe from Harvard and Brandeis University in the fall of the last year. My tax rate on my salary, so households also pay taxes, right, went from 20 to 50%. So the overall tax take that we have in the European Union, using Eurostat figures, so we can all check that, for 2023 was 40% of GDP, the paltry amount of 6.9 trillion euros. That seems to be rather reasonable, I would say. So, against this background, what we believe that the European Union should be doing is to prioritize meaningful reforms to streamline this taxation framework. I honestly hope that nobody will actually disagree with that. Implementing well-designed policies, or should I say, even better designed policies than the one that we habitually do. And measures that actually foster higher economic growth, promote the single market, the single largest asset that we in the European Union have after 75 years of we doing European integration, and accelerating innovation in key industries that will also help support both the green and the digital transitions. High ask, but I mean, if it were easy, other people would be doing the job, not us. We strongly believe that the European Union is standing at a pivotal juncture in which the risk of deep and structural disconnection between different parts of the global economy provides a danger, but in some ways also an opportunity for us. Now, we have many things that we as an economy, the European economy, the thing that actually pays the famous European social model, have to face, from the multiple crises that we had in the past few years to ongoing extremely high relative energy prices, aggressive industrial policies which are pursued by other parts of planet Earth, which fundamentally compromise our competitiveness and therefore the future of this part of the planet as a location for business and for overall quality of life. What we think would be advisable for the European Union in terms of policy making to be pursuing during the current political cycle. I'm not going to be saying to you anything that is unusual. I'm fundamentally not a creative person at the end of the day. Sorry for that too. First of our recommendations is the following. Establish a comprehensive approach to taxation that prioritizes competitiveness and economic growth. Because believe you me, I'm someone that was actually born in a developing country, and I can tell you what lack of growth and low GDP per capita do to you as both individuals and as society. You need that to afford all the things that we take for granted here in our lives. comprehensive approach to taxation, focusing on both long-term strategies and immediate action to improve corporate income tax systems in the EU, is a key priority on our point of view. To avoid even more investment leakage, do not believe on those stories that capital is flowing back to Europe. This is a blip, believe you me, and we are already seeing what was happening before. We had a current account deficit in relation to the United States on the investment account of something like 8% of European Union GDP, after we having a surplus as recently as about 4 years ago. So it's really a significant switch, and that shows that people are not investing on us. Okay? Now, to avoid this continuing to happen, we really have to make efforts to ensure that new and existing tax rules are stable, are simple, and offer great tax certainty to stimulate corporate investment. Reasonable request, I would assume. In terms of our second type of recommendation, we do suggest that we evaluate and revise the current tax framework to remove duplication among measures that we have, and to refrain from introducing, even with the best of intentions, additional complexities on a framework that we already have, which is arguably on the Byzantine side of the distribution. Okay, an evaluation of the existing EU tax framework laws is, on our point of view, warranted to eliminate things which are arguably no longer necessary, because you have already other pieces of legislation which we introduce later, which take care of those things. In particular, a reevaluation of the measures contained in the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, which are now largely covered by other provisions, control the foreign corporation rules, the interest limitation rules, rules on hybrid mismatches, seem to us advisable. This exercise, which is perhaps already being done on the country-by-country reporting that our colleagues from Digita, or I should say counterparts of Digita Sud are currently undertaking, should be a locus for this type of evaluation. BEFIT proposals should also be reevaluated to ensure that we have an adequate and robust solution in terms of effectively achieving its overarching aims of simplification and to reduce compliance costs while remaining fully consistent with the two-pillar solution, which we fundamentally support, and maintaining the competitiveness of European businesses. Our third recommendation, or wish list, if you wish, that is not going to be a long Christmas tree. I have only tomorrow after that. Improving and developing our value-added tax systems to ensure that is both effective and fair. We believe that both things are necessary. Now, in recent years, the fundamental principles underpinning our VAT system, fiscal neutrality, proportionality, and legality, always a good idea in a law-based society, have been undermined, resulting in increased obstacles and costs for European businesses and customers alike. We are all customers in the end of the day, right? We buy stuff, we produce stuff. While the proposed measures in the recent VIDA package have the potential to ameliorate the EU VAT system and could help reduce the VAT gap, another thing which we do believe is also something that should be taken into consideration within measure, member states' administrative regulations remain overly complex, constituting a barrier to cross-border trade. We don't actually have an integrated single market in the European Union after 3/4 of a century. In many, many areas, taxation is one of the reasons for this. Now, converging digital VAT reporting solutions is also an important part of this, to develop a robust set of digital solutions that will ease administrative burden on businesses. However, even there, it's essential for us to assume that the overarching goal of reducing the EU VAT gap does not reduce in additional compliance burden for businesses operating in the European Union. Close cooperation between businesses in the individual member states, on which the responsibility for taxation does lie, seems to us necessary for this to happen. and we commend the approaches of non-legislative procedures of the Commission to try to proceed on this area. We also believe that when you work on the VAT directive, you should treat both goods and services in a more equal footing, because after all, we do live in a very services-oriented type of a society. Half of the people that now have their computers open when they are listening to me probably ordering something on Amazon. So you all know that. Voila. This also, incidentally, is a mechanism for us to be supporting the development of more circular business models. Revising current VAT rules on recycled products is a necessary part of this discussion. This could involve introducing measures related to the way that we invoice via negative VAT the donation of certain types of goods when they are received by counterparts. This is an ongoing discussion that we have with our counterparts in the Commission. I promise I will be coming to an end. I like to stick to the constraints which are given to me, a personality thing. My fourth point on my relatively short wish list is to develop a coherent regulatory and fiscal framework to achieve the green transition. We presumably we all believe that this is one of the comparative advantages that we have in the European Union. Now, in context of the EU ambitions to reach its very laudable climate neutrality goals, it's important to ensure that the combined effect of the different climate policies does not result in an uneven set of incentives that makes achieving those climate goals more costly for all of us than it needs to be. Not that anybody that ever worked with the European Commission would believe that they do overlapping types of regulations. Now, to give practical examples of this, key steps towards the goal in aligning proposal arrangements include the Energy Tax Directive, the Renewable Energy Directives, the Emission Trade Scheme, which is also part of this discussion, and of course, the CBAM. The alignment of those different, sometimes inconsistent, sometimes overlapping types of legislation is something that we actually consider necessary for us to be achieving as a continent, as the European Union, the aims that we state to ourselves that we want to achieve. Now, getting back to my speech and on conclusion, on the 2 minutes that I have left, the EU taxation framework does play a pivotal role in shaping the economic landscape and fostering the competitiveness of our continent. Through strategic reforms and proactive measures, the EU can navigate the growing complexities of the international environment, which are not only related to one particular country, promote sustainable growth, and achieve broader policy objectives that we believe are shared by all our member states and therefore our populations. By prioritizing the actually rather brief set of recommendations that I just outlined here, we believe that the EU can position itself as a leader in fostering a fair, efficient, and competitive taxation framework that supports long-term prosperity for all and resilience. Many thanks for your attention, and I look forward to an eventual discussion. Thanks so much.